from the Haggadah Pesach that there is a pattern in the Makkos. The Haggadah says that Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda used to give a memory aid for the Makkos, and they put them together in smaller groups. Datzach, Adash, Ba'achav. Datzach is, of course, an acronym for the first three plagues. Dom, Sfardei, Akinim. Take the first letter of each. You have Daled, Tzadi, and Chav. That's Datzach. And then Adash, take the first letters of the next three. Oroiv, Dever, and Shchin. And Ba'achav, take the first letters of the next four. And that's Borod, Arba, Choshech, and that's Ba'a, and Bechoros, which of course is Ba'achav. And we're going to leave out Makas Bechoros tonight. Makas Bechoros really is a category unto itself. It's the final plague. It completes the entire process of liberation. Essentially, you have three sets of three plagues. The first three, Dam, Sfardei, Akinim, the blood of frogs, lice. The next set, Arav, Dever, Shchin, all the animals, the pestilence, and the boils. And the last three, Borod, Arba, Choshech, Hail, locusts, and darkness. Now, in the Chumash, if you read the Chumash, there is a very interesting aspect of the pattern which emerges. That within each set of three, Paro was forewarned about the first two. So he was warned about the dam, about the blood. He was warned about the tzvardeya. Kinim, the lights came, no warning. Without warning. In the next set, again, the Araiv and the Dever both come with warnings. The Shchin, the third plague of that set, no warning. And in the third set, again, the Borod and the Arba come with warning. The Choshech comes without warning. If you look in the Chumash, you'll see this is the case. Which implies that these are three different categories. And Rosh puts it this way, that if you are deserving of three plagues, you only need to be warned 2 times. 2 warnings should be enough. The third time, you can get it without warning. But not the 4th time, because the 4th time is not the 4th time. The 4th time is the beginning of a new cycle of 3. So, 1, 2, number 3 is without warning. In the second cycle of 3, 1, 2, the third without warning. In the third cycle of 3 again, 1, 2, the third is without warning. But it's not 9 plagues. It's 3 sets of 3. That's Datzach, Adash, Ba'achav. Each is a separate set. Now the question is, what is the idea of the 3 sets? And within each set, is there a progression? In other words, first we have to analyze the sets. In what way does set number 2 build on the foundation of set number 1? In which way does set number 3 build on the foundation of set number 2? And then within each set of 3, how does the second Makkah build on the first, and how does the third Makkah build on the second? Now Rav Hirsch says an amazing thing. Rav Hirsch says that within each set of 3, there's also a development. And he makes the following point. It's extremely interesting. As we know, if we go back to Parshas Lech Lecha, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu foretold to Avram at the covenant that the Jews would be strangers in a strange land and enslaved and tormented. So God told Avram 3 things. So Yedo Ateda, you should know. Ki ger yeh zarecha. Your children will be strangers, be'eretz lo lohem, in a foreign land. That's the first decree. That your children will be strangers. Being a stranger itself is very uncomfortable. Even not being enslaved, not being tortured. Being an alien, being a foreigner, is uncomfortable. It's stressful, it's painful. But that's not where it's going to end. Then it'll be va'avodim. Then you'll be enslaved. Takes it to a greater level of discomfort. But ultimately it'll be it'll be torture. And we've said many times that if you study the story, the history of the Jews in Egypt, we see there was a progression. It was many, many years the Jews lived in Egypt as strangers before the enslavement began. From the time that Yaakov came down to Mitzrayim until the time of the Exodus was 210 years. But the enslavement only began 86 years before the end. Chazal have a Kabbalah that the enslavement began at the time that Miriam was born. And the calculation which Chazal follow is that if Moshe Rabbeinu was 80 at the time of the Exodus, and his older brother was 83, Aaron was 83, that the Chumash says explicitly. So if we assume that there was 3 years between Aaron and Moshe, probably there was 3 years between Miriam and Aaron. And therefore, Miriam was 86. And Chazal have a Kabbalah, that's when the enslavement began. So the Jews were in Egypt for many, many years. For 124 years before the enslavement began. That was a period of Galus. There were foreigners. There were foreigners who lived in a strange land, a strange culture, strange things to eat, strange people, unusual climate, unusual living conditions. That itself is a terrible affliction, to be a stranger, to be an alien. Then, of course, the enslavement began. 86 years of enslavement. Avodim, they were enslaved. But it's not yet the level of torture. Closer to the end, it already reached the level of torture. When Paro withdrew the straw, for example, that already raises enslavement to the level of torture. So we have 3 gezeres, 3 decrees that were imposed on the Jewish people incrementally. Being strangers, being enslaved, and being tortured. Now there are other forms of torture too. I mean, this is just an example of torture. The drowning of the babies, the Ramban says, was even more than torture. That's already genocide, and therefore for that, Paro received a special punishment. That goes even beyond the torture. It's more than torture. But in any case, these are the 3 levels. So Rosh says like this, that the Makos were meant to be a rebuke to Paro. A rebuke to Paro. And therefore, within each set of Makos, the first Makkah is to rebuke Paro and the Egyptians for having held on to the Jews as strangers. The second Makkah is a rebuke for having held on to them as slaves. And the third Makkah is a rebuke for having held on to them in a way that would be considered torture. So first says, let's think about this for a minute. If you really want to rebuke the Egyptians, what do you really want to do? You want to give them a taste of their own medicine, right? You want to give them the opportunity to feel what it's like to be a stranger, what it's like to be a slave, and what it's like to be tortured. Well, let's define that. What does it mean to be a stranger? Well, what does it mean to be at home? Right? Well, when you're at home, you're comfortable. Everything is familiar, everything is relaxing, etc. I mean, when you're in your own house, right? You know where everything is, it's comfortable, right? You're in someone else's house, you don't know where this is, where that is, where is a milchik spoon, where's a fleischig spoon, you don't know where anything is, right? You don't know where the bathroom is. In other words, it's just, you're disoriented because you're a stranger, you're not in your own place. To be a slave is something else. See, a master feels a certain superiority over his slaves. A slave feels a sense of inferiority in relation to his master. It's not just that it's uncomfortable. It's not just you're disoriented. In other words, you feel dominated. You feel controlled. There's someone who's a master over you. Torture, of course, requires no definition. Torture is physical affliction. So verses like this. Let's talk about the first mark of each set, blood. the river, the Nile, turned to blood. The Nile was the source of Egyptian security. Everything came from the Nile. All the irrigation, all the nourishment, ultimately derived from the Nile. When you are cut off from your source of sustenance, you're disoriented, you're a stranger. In other words, this is not the Egypt that the Egyptians were accustomed to. This isn't the Egypt that they grew up in. The Egypt in which they grew up in had a reliable Nile, a reliable river. It provided for them, supplied them, it hydrated them. Now, something which is very fundamental to the essence of what Egypt is being pulled out from under their feet. So, how do the Egyptians feel? Right? Something which was such a basic part of their land. Something which they taken for granted for centuries. Now is corrupted, now is ruined. It's not their land anymore, it's not Egypt. This is not what Egypt was meant to be. This is not the way it ever was. So this is a taste of what it is like to be a stranger. You go to Arayv, right? Wild animals. What does it mean? It's the same idea. You know, animals live in the jungle. Human beings live in the clearing. Right? Everything has its space. This is my space. This is their space. They don't infringe on my territory because this is mine. Right? When the wild animals invade, what really is happening? What really is happening is that the space that was meant for human habitation now is being taken over by animals. It's not my space anymore. It's not my space. Imagine if you'd have a dozen uninvited guests who would take over your house. You would feel it's not your house anymore. Right now it's their house. So again, you feel as a stranger in your own house. Barad is the same. The hail, says the first, is the same thing. The hail also, one thing that you count on is the weather. In other words, if you live in California, so you count on temperate weather. It's not going to snow. It's not going to hail. It's not going to. You're not going to have a blizzard. No, this is Southern California. In Toronto, we can count on no hurricanes. We don't have that. Florida has hurricanes. We don't have any tropical storms here. We have other things, but there's a certain expectation. This year we've been a little short in the snow department, but there's expectations. You're accustomed to things being a certain way. All of a sudden you have Egypt, which was a semi-tropical, probably a fairly dry climate. All of a sudden you have hail. Hail, it hails in northern countries, and that's where you have hail. You don't have hail in Egypt. So again, all these are makos which give a sense of being not at home. The familiar homeland has changed in significant ways. So this is giving them a taste of their own medicine. You made the Jews strangers, now you'll be strangers in your own land. Go to the next step. To be enslaved. To be enslaved means you have a master. Now, the frogs. He understands that the frogs are the same idea. In other words, normally frogs are very scared of human beings. Frogs are scared of human beings. If you go frog hunting, favorite childhood activity of, 6-year-olds. You go frog hunting, you're going to see the frogs are very elusive. They're not sitting around there waiting for you to catch them. They hide. They're hard to come by. All of a sudden, the frogs become so bold, and they enter your house, and they enter your bed, and they enter your ovens, and so on and so forth. What's going on? The idea is because we're accustomed to thinking of ourselves as being the master of the frogs. Here, the frogs are asserting themselves as our masters. Because you're not going to tell us that we have to run away. We're going to tell you to run away. Run away from us. So therefore, the plague of Tzfardeia gives the Egyptian masters a sense of what it's like to be a slave. And first says that the Makkah of Oraiv, of Dever rather, which is the second Makkah of the second set, is the same thing. In other words, what is the Egyptian source of power, of wealth? Their livestock. Okay? Their livestock are their servants. The beasts of burden, the cattle, the camels, the donkeys. Right? These are their slaves. But that's what the Dever takes away. The Dever takes away their slaves, their animal slaves. So that, in a way, relates to the idea of avodim. The arba, the locust as well. The invasion of the locusts means that instead of the insects being enslaved to man, man now becomes a slave to the insects. And the third set of makos, the lice, the boils, the darkness, this is already torture. And that needs no explanation. You use your imagination and see that, and therefore it says first that within each set of makos, we have the Egyptians first being given a taste of what it means to be a stranger, then what it means to be enslaved, and then what it means to be tortured. That's a very, very interesting observation of Hirsch makes. We're not going to elaborate on that. But in each set, what is the progression of each set? So here, I'll show you the two interpretations. Rav Hirsch says that if you look at the makos, you see they operate in three different spheres of influence. Because if you talk about the world as we know it, you can divide it into three sections. There is that which is below the top surface of the earth, that which is underground, that which is below the surface of the water. There is that which is in the realm of heaven. And then there's the space in between. Right? We live in the space between the surface of the earth and the dome of heaven. We're in between. We're not in between space. So the first three makos, Dom, Tzfardeia, and Kinim, relate to that below the surface. The Dom, of course, is the river. The river is below the surface of the earth, turns to blood. The Tzfardeia come out of the river. The Kinim is that the dust of the earth turns to lice. So those three makos relate to the realm below the earth's surface. The last three makos, if you think about it, the Bora, the Arba, and the Choshech, they relate to the heavenly sphere. The hail comes from heaven, the locusts fly at a very high altitude. The darkness, of course, means that the sun and the moon are eclipsed. So that relates to the higher realm. The middle makos take place in the middle realm. This is where the animals travel, this is where the animals die, and this is where the human beings suffer their boils. So first says we have a progression here. The first makos start in the lower realm, the next set is in the middle realm, the third set is in the upper realm. That's very interesting. It's a pattern. What the ultimate significance of that pattern is hard to know, but this is the Rav Hirsch's approach. The Abarbanel makes an observation on the Psukim, and he points out something else. He says, if you look at the first makkah of each set, the Dom, which is the first makkah of the first set, and Oroi, which is the first makkah of the second set, and Borod, which is the first makkah of the third set, and you look at the warnings that God gave, it's different warnings. The first warning, the warning before blood, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe to tell Paro that I'm going to bring this plague, and you will know Ki Ani Hashem, that I am Hashem. So the first makkah, by extension the first set, is to impress upon Paro the idea that Ani Hashem, I am Hashem. If you look at the makkah of Oroi, there it says that Paro will know Ki Ani Hashem B'kerev ha'aretz. I am Hashem in the midst of the land. In the midst of the land. And before the makkah of Borod, which is the first makkah of the third set, Hashem tells Moshe to tell Paro that you'll know Ki ein kamoni b'chol ha'aretz. There is no being like me in the world. So these expressions are peculiar. First, God says, Paro will know that I am God. Then he says, he will know I am God in the midst of the earth. And then he says, he will know that I am God, that no one is like me. Now, the Ramban already points out the difference of these expressions. The Ramban says like this, that there are three basic beliefs we have about God. Three basic beliefs. One is that God exists. Now, what does it mean God exists? We have a very, very precise definition of God. Right? Many people believe in God, but they may have different definitions. But if you believe, for example, that God is light, God is love, God is energy, you may think you're a believer in God, but we would call you an atheist. Right? Well, what is the precise definition of God? God is the source of all existence. God is the creator of all things. That is our definition of God. To believe in God means to believe in a being who is the source of all existence. So that's the most basic principle. That idea, and we've said this many times, that God is the source of all things is the very meaning of the name of Hashem, of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. We've said over many times that the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is related to the verb to be mehaveh, which means to bring into existence. So Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, derived from the verb to be mehaveh, implies the idea that God is the source of all existence. God is the source of all things. So when Hashem says, Ani Hashem, what he is saying is, I am the being who is the source of all existence. That's what it means, Ani Hashem. What does it mean to say, Ani Hashem b'kerev haaretz? I am Hashem in the midst of the land, means that I am engaged in the earth. I am involved in the earth. I am not removed from the earth. This is the idea of divine providence. This is our second belief. Not just that God is the creator and the source of all existence, but he is the manager of all existence. He controls all existence. He has not removed himself. He has not retired. He hasn't cut himself off. He is actively engaged. He manages and micromanages every aspect of the world. That's what it means to be a Kerev Haaretz. Right? He's not removed to the highest heaven, where he is disengaged and uninvolved in the affairs of this earth. He is Hashem b'kerev haaretz. He is here, he is involved, he knows, he handles, he controls. That's the second belief. Divine providence. Not just that God is the creator, right? But God is the one who controls and manages the world. Now there's another belief which goes beyond that, which is the idea of divine omnipotence. Omnipotence. That means that there is no being like God. There are many powerful beings in the world. But there is nothing like God, because God is the more powerful than anything else. And therefore, by definition, there is nothing which is his equivalent. That's the third idea. Ein kamoni b'chol haaretz. So the Ramban already points out that these three verses, God is telling Moshe that Paro is going to be instructed in these three basic beliefs about God. Paro will know Ani Hashem, which means that there is a creator. He will know that Ani Hashem b'kerev haaretz, I am Hashem in the midst of the land, that God exercises control and providence over earth. And finally, the Ein kamoni b'chol haaretz, that God is absolutely omnipotent. Now this, the Ramban already observes, but the Abarbanel attaches this to the patterns of Makkos. He says that the first set of Makkos, the tzach, dams for akinim, blood, frogs, and lice, are to impress upon Paro the idea that there is a creator. The next set of Makkos takes it to a higher level. Not only is there a creator, but God exercises providence. The last three Makkos take it to the highest level that shows that God is omnipotent. Now the Abarbanel, if I understand them correctly, seems to understand that it's not that each idea is conveyed by three. It's cumulative. The first three are enough to teach you that there is a creator. The first six together teach you that God is the controller of the world, that he exercises providence. And the 9 together take it to the level of God's omnipotence. Because how so? A makkah itself is pretty dazzling. Even the first three makkahs, which weren't the most amazing of them, that's a pretty powerful lesson. After those three makkahs, Paro should get the message already that there is a God. If God was not the creator of all things, he would not be able to perform such miracles. But the idea of providence requires something more. The idea of providence means that God micromanages. And the first three makos, says the Barbanel, are interesting in that these are makos which do not tend to spread. They aren't contagious, if you will. They don't spread. The next three are makos which, by their very nature, tend to spread very fast. Alright, wild animals on the stampede cover a lot of territory. Dever, pestilence of animals, is very, very contagious, and shchin, boils, are also very, very contagious. And therefore, the fact that these makos which tend to spread stopped just at the border between the Egyptian neighborhoods and the Jewish neighborhoods, that shows something extra. Not just that there is a God who is the creator, but there's a God who controls and who micro-controls. Because otherwise it's amazing. These second three makos, they should have traveled much farther. And they stopped on a dime. Just at this point. This is where they stopped. So that shows that God is also the controller of providence. So this is the Rabbi now. When you get to the third set of makos, we find something which is amazing, which is that God's makos cover the entire realm of existence, from the subterranean realm to the middle space, so to speak, the in-between space, and the heavenly realm. That is a demonstration of God's omnipotence. He is in control of all things. And therefore, after the first three makos, Paro could be expected to learn that there is a creator. After the next three, Paro could be expected to learn that that creator exercises providence. After the third set of makos, Paro could be expected to know that God is omnipotent. Now, this is very interesting. What the Rabbanel really is saying is that in terms of Paro's instruction, there is a progression. In other words, and that's, by the way, a very, very good pedagogical method, is if you're teaching something, first you want to lay down the basic foundation, then you want to build on that foundation and go to the next level. Right? So, first you lay down the basic principle that there is a God. Then you lay down the next level, that not only does God exist, not only is there a creator, he's also the manager of the world, the controller of the world. Not only that, but he's omnipotent to boot. That's a very, very good pedagogical thing. But if we understand that the makos are punishments, as if from a first, and that's really the idea which seems to be implicit in the pattern. Remember, we said within each group, first he is warned twice, then he gets the third plague without warning. So we explain what's the rationale behind that? Because you only need two warnings. After the second warning, you can be punished without warning. So why does the cycle start again? In other words, if the second set is really a higher understanding, and the third set is an even higher understanding, it seems very, very bizarre, as if to say that, let me give you a muscle. Let's say you have a boy who fails grade 9 math. It wouldn't make sense to put him in grade 10 just to have him fail that too. And then after he fails grade 10 math, put him into calculus to fail that too? It doesn't seem to make sense. In other words, if Paro got the third makkah because he failed in his first lesson to know that Ani Hashem, what is the purpose of putting him into the higher class where he's going to have to learn the lesson that Ani Hashem B'Karav Haaretz just to fail that? And then you put him in the next higher class, right, to learn the lesson of Ani Hashem Ein Kamoni B'Chol Haaretz, there's no one like me, he's certainly going to fail that. In other words, if the makkas were for the purpose of instruction, this is a 10-part lecture series. on the subject of God, I understand that you're progressing, and Paro hopefully is learning and mastering each level, and he's growing, he's ascending, until he'll receive his diploma in the end. But if we're talking about punishment, and Paro's already failed the first semester, what is the idea of putting him through the second semester and putting him through the third semester? He's already failed the first semester. I think there's another idea over here. And let me share with you a little bit of social science. There was a famous ethicist in Harvard named Lawrence Kohlberg. And Kohlberg was influenced by the ideas of the famous the Swiss psychologist Piaget, who believed that in child development there are stages. There are stages which are identifiable, stages of development. You know, a child at this stage of development, you expect him to be able to do certain things he can't do. A few months later, he reaches another stage. A few months later, another stage. And these stages can be defined, and they always follow a certain pattern. One always follows the other in this precise order. And this was a common idea. So Kohlberg said that let's study whether moral development also takes place in stages. Because as a child grows, there's a sense of morality and the grounding of his morality, the justification for his moral sense. Does this also progress and develop in stages? And he argued that in fact there are three stages of moral development. The first he called pre-conventional, and the second he called conventional, and the third, guess what, he called post-conventional. And he said that within each stage there are two levels. There are 6 levels, 3 stages and 6 levels of moral development. The first level is rooted in really yourself. The most basic is to avoid punishment. You know, the youngest children, the least developed children, will act in a manner which, hopefully will act in that, I mean somebody will never achieve this either, but will act in a manner that will avoid getting caught and avoid getting into trouble. So if you take a young child and say, what is wrong with taking cookies out of the cookie jar? He may answer, what is wrong is that mommy will catch me and I'll get a spanking. And that's it. Nothing higher than that, nothing loftier than that, nothing more sophisticated than that. It's simple as that. It's, you do whatever you have to do to avoid being punished. A little bit of a higher level of that is to advance self-interest. Now, if I do the right thing, then mommy may give me a prize. Now, whether you consider that a higher level or not a higher level, we're not going to debate. You know, some would say that that's not any higher than the first level. But he argued that it is. Now, the idea of avoiding punishment, as opposed to the idea of advancing one's self-interest, he says are two distinct levels in the first stage, which he calls pre-convention. You know, there's no moral sense, there's no abstract moral principle. It's all about yourself. Either avoiding punishment or advancing your own self-interest. That he calls pre-convention. Pre-convention. And that's the lowest level of moral development. And again, some people never reach it at all. And some people may reach this level and that go beyond that. But then there's the next level. The next level he calls conventional. Conventional is the idea, it's not about punishment, it's not about self-interest. It's the idea of society approving of me. That's why it's conventional. The idea of convention, the idea of people coming together, people having a certain attitude towards one another. Now this is very important in the next level. The next level, everyone wants to be looked at as a good person. Right? I want my parents to be proud of me is not the same thing as saying I don't want my parents to punish me. I want my parents to give me prizes. It's a little more sophisticated, right? You know, by the time a child goes to school, and if the child is motivated to get good grades, it's not because I get bad grades my parents will punish me, or if I get good grades, my parents will give me prizes. Says, I want my parents to be proud of me. I want to be approved of. I want to be accepted. I want to be valued. Right? That's already a higher level. Okay? Obviously not the highest level. Right? Here too he discerns two stages. There's one stage, the approval is very personal. It's something which is related to me directly. My parents should approve of me, my friends should approve of me, my neighbors should approve of me. By the way, this is, of course, is a very important thing. Whose approval is more important? Your parents or your friends? That's the that's the real challenge of being a teenager and the real challenge of having a teenager, right? Grappling with that issue. But there's something which is very, very personal. There's another level where it's not the approval of specific people. It's not, I want my parents to like me, I want my friends to like me, or my neighbors to like me. There's something broader than that, which is society. That I should be a valued member of society. It's a little more vague, it's a little more abstract. It's not a question of what a specific person will think of me. Because I want to be a person who is valued by the world, who is valued by society at large. That's a little bit of a higher level, so a greater abstraction. That's the second level of the second stage. Okay? But at this point, we're still not dealing with abstract moral principles. We're talking about the idea of, again, how I feel about myself. What is my place? So again, on the first level, how do my friends think of me? How do my parents think of me? How do my neighbors think of me? At the next level, how does society as a organic whole think of me? Do I fit? Am I a valued member of society? That's the conventional level. The post-conventional level, already, the person begins to think in terms of moral principles. And here there are two levels. First is the level of social contract, which is the level that in a society there are commitments that we make to one another by which we should live. And that's what binds us. And on the highest level, there are universal ethical principles. That it's not because not because I've agreed to live by them. I live by them because they are correct. I would conjecture that in our system of chinuch, we introduce our children to post-conventional thinking at a very early age. Hopefully they pick up the message. But I think that's certainly what we're trying to impart, that morality is not just a question of avoiding punishment or advancing self-interest. It's not simply a question of what people will think of you, right? Whether it's your Rebbe, your parents, or whether it's Klal Yisrael as a whole. It's a question of what is the right thing to do. And the right thing to do, we take to the highest level, which is that we're living in God's world. And therefore, it's correct, right, to conform to His will, because He gives us everything, and therefore that creates an indebtedness that we have to acknowledge. Now the truth is this. The truth is that if you take these stages in reverse, we can say the following. Let's say I meet a young man, and I expect him, very, very high expectations of him. I expect that he should function at the post-conventional level. And he fails. He fails. He doesn't function at that level. He doesn't think in terms of universal moral principles. So, okay, he's failed at that level. So, what next? Okay, let's see, perhaps at least at the conventional level, he can function. Right? Let's say he fails at that level, but I can expect of him, well, at least at the pre-conventional level, let him function. Right? Now, the irony is this. The irony is that when we talk about these stages, the pre-conventional, the conventional, and the post-conventional, in relation to the Ribono Shel Olam, they also correspond to our three basic beliefs about God. But in reverse. The belief in God's omnipotence, if we manage to absorb that lesson, we should certainly function on the pre-conventional level. Think about it for a moment, right? If God is all-powerful, you'd have to be a fool to think you can get away with it. And whatever you're thinking of doing, so even if you're on that lowest level, pre-conventional morality, where all you think about is avoiding punishment, it's okay. If you're dealing with a human being, a boss of a dam, flesh and blood, you think you can get away with it. Well, you think you can get away with it with Ribono Shel Olam. If you reflect for a moment on God's omnipotence, right, then you'll understand that you have to function at least at that level of morality. To function on the conventional level vis-a-vis God, it isn't necessary that God should be omnipotent, but it is necessary that God be the mashgiach, that he should be engaged, he should be b'kerev haaretz, that he notices, he's involved. In other words, if the question is, do I live up to God's expectations? What do you mean, do I live up to God's expectations? Does he know what I'm doing? Does he care what I'm doing? Does he see what I'm doing? Right? Until you reflect on the idea of Ani Hashem b'kerev haaretz, you can't function on the conventional level, because you can't say, I'm going to act a certain way because I'm living up to God's expectations, he'll approve of me, he'll accept me. What difference does it make? He's not involved, he's not engaged, he doesn't know, he doesn't care. But to live in the highest moral principle, ironically, you only need that first belief that there is a God. Because on the highest level, it's not a question of gaining God's approval, it's not a question of avoiding his punishment. It's a consequence of the mere fact that God is the creator. This is his world. Right? He is the source of my own existence. That creates a certain obligation that I have to him. And therefore, on that level, I can function as a person who lives by abstract moral principles simply by acknowledging the fact that there is a God. So now I think we can understand the whole pattern of the makas this way. The first three makas are to impress upon Paro that there is a God. At that level, right, Hashem should say, if Paro would have learned this lesson, if he could learn this lesson, then Paro could be expected to function on the post-conventional, on the highest moral level. On the highest moral level. Because if you really believe that God is the creator of all things, then there should be a sense that I have certain moral obligations that I live up to. A person should understand that you can't receive and not pay back. You can't be the recipient of the gift of life and not acknowledge your benefactor. And therefore, if the purpose of the makas of the psach, of the first set, are to impress upon Paro that Hashem is the creator of the universe, if Paro would be at that level of moral development, that he functions on the post-conventional level, then that should be enough. Paro should get the message at that point. But Paro was not at that level. He fails the course. So Kodesh Baruch Hu says, okay, we can't expect Paro to function on the post-conventional level. Let's see if he can function on the conventional level. So Hashem says at that point, okay, well, what does Paro need to know about me to be able to function on the conventional level? He needs to know that I'm engaged, I'm involved, that I notice, I can approve and disapprove. So therefore, Kodesh Baruch Hu says, I'm going to send a second set of makos, right, which are designed to impress that upon Paro. If Paro is a person who is developed morally to the point that he can function on the conventional level, as soon as he knows that Ani Hashem b'kerev haaretz, I am Hashem in the midst of the earth, Paro will comply. Paro will do the right thing. So Kodesh Baruch Hu sends the second set of makas, which is Adash. The function of Adash, as we said, is to impress upon Paro the idea of divine providence. Paro again fails the test, doesn't send the Jews out. So Kodesh Baruch Hu then says, okay, listen. So Paro apparently is not on the level of development where he exercises morality in the post-conventional sense or the conventional sense. Let's start with the pre-conventional sense. Can Paro just act in his own self-interest? So for that, we have to impress upon Paro the idea of God's omnipotence, that you can't escape God. So let's send another set of makos, the last three, borrowed Arba and Choshech, whose purpose is to impress upon Paro the idea of omnipotence. But now Paro certainly should relent, even if he's so morally compromised that he only thinks in terms of self-interest. But now that he knows that God is omnipotent, certainly he should give in and release the Jews. He fails that test too. And therefore all that is left is the Makas B'charas, and of course the Makas B'charas does the trick. So I think that the pattern really goes this way. That in other words, it's ascending in the sense that we're talking about three ascending principles of divine providence, but it's descending in the sense that each principle could be the ground for a lower level of moral action. So the first set is to test Paro, whether he can function on the level of post-conventional morality. Can he, knowing that there is a God who is creator, can he act in accordance with an abstract moral principle? No, if he can't do that, go to the next step. Can he act in a conventional morality? Can he act in order to be accepted and gain approval of God, knowing that God is B'karav Haaretz, that God is engaged and God is involved in the world? He fails that test too. The last three makas had to test Paro. Well, listen, if he's so morally compromised, but at least he should be able to function on the pre-conventional level. So let's impress upon him the idea of God's omnipotence. Maybe that should be enough. At least he should act in his own self-interest. Paro doesn't do that, and that's the progression of the makas. This is a theory that perhaps will explain why the makas follow the Seder that they do. Needless to say, it's a very, very complex parsha, and there are many, 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 many little twists and turns in the story. But this, I think, might be an overall structure that gives it some coherence. Okay.